Hey guys, it's Josh with the Update channel, and you might be wondering, why are we looking at the dozer again? I thought we were done with that one. Well, we were, and I even posted a video on it, doing the repairs that were needed to replace the head. The problem is, after I posted the video, about half an hour after, I got this comment. Basically, while reading this, there's different valves on the ones that have dowels. I could feel like dread rolling over my face while reading it, because this line right here, the keepers will come out, really made me nervous, because this is what happens. So if what Rock was saying there, and thank you so much, Rock, for saying that. Also, the guys over at Hell's Canyon Diesel emailed me saying that this is also a problem. So obviously more than one person's heard of it. I had never heard of it before. No one else in our shop had heard of it before. It'll push on the rotator, the rotocoil, instead of the valve itself. Now, if you push on the rotator instead of the valve, that's basically how you pop the valves out of the head. Because pushing the valve down doesn't remove the keepers, but putting the rotator down will push the valve spring without pushing the valve down. Now this thing I ran it for probably 20 minutes that was Friday. This here is being recorded on Monday, and what we're looking at here is the bridges. So basically, you have to get different style bridges if you have this style head, apparently. Now what we're doing here is checking to see. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull the bridge off and inspect it. And look at that ring. That ring should not be there. That means it's hitting the rotocoil. Now, since it's hitting the rotocoil, that's not good, but I also want to check the depth on the bridges. So what we're gonna have to do is try and figure out a way to measure the depth here and then measure the heights on the valves. Now you can see those rings around the holes there. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it was definitely hitting the rotocoils. So what is our depth on these bridges? It's about 0.275 inches. So just over a quarter of an inch. So 0.275. Now the old head, we still have the old head here. We need to measure how much the valve sticks above the rotocoil, because obviously you want the valve to protrude higher above the rotocoil than the bridge cup depth is. Or if it doesn't, it'll hit the rotocoil, which is what seems to be the problem here. So I figured out, I was like, okay, well, if I use a sled gauge, we're gonna be 100, 200, 300, 3, so 0.3, we'll say 14. So we are 0.314, so we've got about 40 thousandths margin of error there. So the old bridges would have worked fine on the old head, and those bridges came off of the old head. Now the new head, we're gonna try and do that same measurement and see what the heck we get. But we have this problem. So my theory of using the depth mic doesn't really work here, because with the valve cover base on, it hits the valve cover base. So we're just kind of wing it here and see, if we're 10 thousandths plus or minus, not that big of a deal. So since we're using an analog depth mic here, it might be a little hard to tell, but we're at 1, 2, so that'd be 0.235, we'll say, 0.225. Basically, it's less than the bridge depth. So it's 100% hitting. We've measured it now. We could also see the evidence. So if we had not have caught this, this would have been the fate of the engine. So I already mentioned it, but I really want to say thank you so much to Rock. And that's amazing that a YouTube comment, and this is not made up, folks. This is really what happened. This engine is basically, the only reason I found out about this is because of the YouTube comment. So we're getting the D8 back in the shop. Now what's scary is they actually ran this D8 over the weekend apparently for testing purposes, which I didn't think was the case. Hey, look at that! A Milwaukee battery. Everyone's always criticizing me for not using Milwaukee. I do have Milwaukee batteries, but I also have the aftermarket ones also. Not sure if I'll be continuing to buy the aftermarket ones, though. They served me well for over a year, and this valve cover was particularly fun because there's an AC line that runs over it, and I sure as heck did not want to drain the AC to get it off of there. So we're just getting the valve covers back off. So luckily, we didn't damage the bridges when taking them out. I didn't throw them away. We still have the old bridges. We could have got, or not bridges, the dowels. We didn't damage the dowels when taking them out, and should be able to get them back in without major issue here. So we got the valve covers off, and here's what we got to work with. You can see all the bridges are in place. Now I did have to put that one bridge back on and adjust it real quick for them to drive it off the trailer and into the shop. They were literally taking that morning, so glad we found it. Now you might notice there's a little pink ring here. Yeah, this fuel line was actually leaking fuel into the engine, so it's actually pretty good that we were taking the valve covers off because I was able to find that and fix that problem. It wasn't loose. I loosened it, retightened it, and it just didn't want to seat. We were going to order a new line. The supervisor was like, well, try polishing the face of the line. I didn't think that would work. I did polish the face. I then kind of did some interesting, I basically torqued the nozzle side first instead of the line side first, and it wasn't leaking. Obviously the customer's going to have to monitor that, though. Watch your oil levels. So what we're doing here is we're just trying to get these old bridges off. So yeah, if we can get the old bridges off, which we can, not all of them though, because obviously some of the valves are open, so it's putting pressure on those bridges. We'll just have to rotate the engine around, get the old bridges out. The new bridges are way, way, way different, and we'll show you those here in a little bit. And they were also not in stock. We had to wait for them next day. And, of course, they all had that ring where they're riding on the rotocoil. See? So, yeah, one of these, I don't know how long it would have ran like this. It might have ran 10 hours, 100 hours, 500 hours, but it would have had an early failure, probably under a heavy load also. But luckily for us and myself, this engine was not destroyed. This week's Destruction of the Week comes from Cole, and this is a Cummins, a 6.7, and as you can see, pretty bad day. So we've got a connecting rod failure. It also looks like it wiped or knocked the camshaft in half there. That's a pretty bad one. Apparently this truck with the engine in it had gone to a body shop for some major repairs, not the engine, and then after it left the body shop, this happened. Now I'm not saying the body shop did anything wrong, just weird, but thank you for the pictures, Cole. Much appreciated. So let's get back to work here. So what we've got is our dowels and our bridges. Now these are the bridges we just removed. You can see the ring on them. And this is, of course, our bridge dowels. Now these look to be in good condition. That's because we didn't damage them taking them out. We used proper tooling. And if you wanted to see what I was doing there, we didn't have the bridges. We didn't have the correct bridges in the previous video. So what we did was we decided, because this dozer was on a time crunch, to swap the bridges. Couldn't find anything in SIS. Still can't, saying that there's anything wrong with that. But this is making the video is, yes, there definitely 100% is a problem if you do that. So what we're doing here is we're just pulling the oil out of the bridge dowel ports or the holes, because if you ever drive a dowel into a hole, it will just hydrolock and it won't fully seat. So you always need to make sure they are dry. So that's what we're doing here. Now you might be wondering, why didn't I catch this when I put it together? It didn't seem unusual, and I'd never even heard of this before. So the bridges swap fine. The distance between the valves is the same. The only thing I did notice was the valve adjustment was on the looser side. Obviously it would be because the cups are so much deeper. It didn't have a ton. So what we're looking here is we're measuring the depth on or how deep the dowel goes in. It's just under 2 inches. So that's basically what we got to do on all of them, basically till it seats. And it's hard to tell, but the hammer will bounce back when it fully seats. If you've ever done dowels before, you know what I'm talking about. So basically, yeah, why didn't I catch it? Well, the only thing that seemed weird to me when putting it back together was the valve adjustment was loose. There wasn't an inch of play, but I had removed the rocker arms, obviously, because the head bolts hold the rocker arms in. And while it was on the loose side, it wasn't super, super, super loose. Like there was a big valve geometry problem. So that's the only thing that I noticed at all with the valve train that was different when putting it together. Now in hindsight, knowing that I was like, hey, it is a little loose, I should have dug further, but this, like I said, this dozer's on a time crunch. And what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to hear like the tone change, but that's not really the most scientific way of doing it. So yeah, definitely I should have looked at this further. However, I'm really blaming Cat on this one. There is nothing on the 3406 B or C insist saying anything about this. I looked up dowels, bridges, heads. I looked up the part number. Nothing mentions it. So luckily, all this ended up being was some labor, and of course, did have to buy the correct bridges. But now what I'm doing here is there's an actual tool. We don't have it though, and we wouldn't have been able to get it in time to install these dowels. But really, dowels, folks, you just have to seat them. The last thing you want to do is have these not be fully seated, because then they could actually stop the bridge from fully depressing. So it'll make more sense when you see the new bridges. You're like, oh, well, how different are these bridges? They're surprisingly different. So once all of our dowels are back in the head, which you can see, successful reinstallation. Yeah, that tube. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't you just take that tube off? That tube goes on 2 humongous O-rings on the turbo, and it was a nightmare to put on, so that's why I left it like that. So these are what the new bridges look like. Intake and exhaust. They are not interchangeable. It's not like the old ones, or it doesn't matter if it's intake or exhaust. See, that's an exhaust. And they're also adjustable, kind of like your overhead's adjustable. Now you have to adjust your bridges, which is a total pain in the butt. But since they ride on a dowel, you have to make sure they are level. Whereas these are super simple, these are super complicated. And look at the cup depth difference there. You can really see it there. It's quite a bit. I mean, just looking at it, it's about half. So yeah, these are way shallower as far as the recessed area goes. So that's how they sit. The adjustments to the exhaust side. So let's put them on. So there's nothing really special about them. It's not like they're numbered. You just have your intake. That has to go on the intake one. You're going to want to lubricate the ports and the dowel before putting this on, because obviously since this rides on the dowel, it's going to be metal to metal contact. So that is an intake. And like I said, it is directional, and it's also, it does matter. You can't put it, well, I mean, I guess you could put an exhaust on an intake, but you don't want to, because the adjuster would hit the rocker. I mean, you'd have a bad day. So yes, put the intakes on the intakes and the exhausts on the exhausts. Now, I've only, I think, ever had to adjust the actual bridges on a truck engine, this style bridge, once or twice in the 17 years I've worked for Cat. Just not something you do that often, and not something you see that often either. If you worked on a lot of B models, I'm sure you're a lot more familiar with them than I am, but this was a real learning experience, so definitely be paying a lot more mindful attention to bridge differences now. So, like I said, you have to adjust these, and it's not a lash setting, it's a preset. So what it is it's contact, then 30 degrees additional. And 30 degrees is an unusual number. It's not 90 degrees where it's a quarter turn. It's not 60 degrees, which is a full flat. So I was trying to figure out a way to do it. And since it's a screwdriver type, the way I found best is put pressure on the bridge in the center and on the inboard spring section till it seats. You'll feel it get firm. Then use your nut as an indicator. So every flat is 60 degrees on a nut, because 6 times 6 is 300, or 60 times 6 is 360 degrees. So if you can get your nut either centered or on the end of a flat, then all you have to do is go either to the center or to the other end of a flat. So that is a good indicator for your 30 degrees. Now, could you use, let's say, a torque angle? Not really on the adjuster, because it's not the nut you're preloading, it's the actual adjuster, which is a flathead screwdriver drive, unfortunately. Not only that, this is not the best of areas, so then I'm just going to torque them, just like I do on the rocker arm overhead adjustment. And the overhead adjustment is actually the same as it was before. It's 15 to 30,000, 15 on intake, 30,000 on the exhaust, which we'll be doing again. I won't be. Having done it from the other side before when the muffler was off, this side was a little trickier, but still not the worst I've ever done. That pen did not want to write there. So yeah, just basically, like, it does complicate the overhead because now you have an adjustment for the bridge and an adjustment for the overhead. But other than that, once they're installed, now you can put the, and I didn't take the push rods out, I just kind of pushed them away enough to get the rocker arms to stand up to put these bridges on. Then you just have to be very careful that the push rods are in place. So, got all the push rods in place. You can see I'm doing the overhead now. And like I said, now you might be saying, well, they're already striped, aren't they all done? Well, no, because remember, I had just done the overhead on this one, so, and the overhead, I did have to back it off somewhat from before, because there is a difference in the heights of the valve, so this would run it. They would have been tight if I hadn't had the push rods out already. Now, probably the hardest part on this was actually just rotating the engine. The D8 turning port is very difficult to get to. It's not as hard as the pinning port. The pinning port was almost impossible with the turbo in place to get on, but the rotating port, not that easy either. So just doing our valve lash. I'm not going to record the full valve lash here. You guys have seen me do valve lash, and I did it already before on the previous video. But like I said, it's 15 30 thousandths, just like it was before. With the bridges do not vary what your valve lash setting is. So the specification, I should say. And just torque, just like I did before. So once that part's done, time to fire it up. Now, one thing is, your visibility in a dozer is horrible. You cannot see in front of you, which is kind of scary. Let's beep the horn before we start them. And this is our throttle. Not creaky at all. Hopefully it fires right up. It did before, so I'm hoping it will this time also. Heck yeah. Fired right up. That's good. Really good. Now, one thing weird about those is there's a throttle pedal, but it's actually a D accelerator. So yeah, your hand control controls how much throttle it has, and then your pedal actually kills the throttle. You go to idle. That's literally backwards. When you say, equipment's backwards from trucks, gives that term a whole new meaning. Hope you guys like this video. And definitely saved myself and the company a lot of money. I want to really say thank you to Rock and Hell's Canyon Diesel for sending that comment and email in. And as always, thanks for watching.